When I first heard the rumors that Leica was making a new Q3 with a 43mm lens, I thought that was a strange focal length to choose. All of the other Qs had that same 28mm Summilux lens. It's actually closer to a 26 according to my personal testing, but it's labeled as a 28, so I'll keep referring to it as a 28. But 28mm is just slightly too wide for my personal taste and my purposes, so I had just been cropping in camera down to 35. When the Q3 was coming out, I was really hoping it would come with a 35mm lens, and I think a lot of other people were asking for a 50mm lens. So Leica just split the difference and chose a focal length right in between 35 and 50. So I'm curious to see how this will work out. I pre-ordered this from B&H the morning it was announced, and I was half expecting that I would have to wait several weeks for this to come in. But they ended up doing a better job with this product release, and it ended up shipping out within 1 or 2 days. And thankfully, it arrived in a somewhat small box compared to Leica standards. They redesigned the packaging for the Q3, and they did away with those cardboard drawers. The camera is not wrapped in plastic, and it's actually a very nice presentation in this box. This camera looks beautiful in person, and the main difference aesthetically is the different color of the leather wrap. It has the same texture and feel as the Q3, but just in a different color. The color looks like some kind of gunmetal gray, and it looks great in person. I think that was a great choice to differentiate this between the Q3, because in all other aspects, it almost looks exactly the same on the outside. I'll do a direct comparison with the Q3 side by side after the unboxing. The documentation sits on top, and below there's 2 compartments with the rest of the accessories. On the right side is the cable to connect to your phone and the finishing ring. The finishing ring is used on the front of the lens to cover the threads if you do not want to use the hood. And below that is the metal lens cap, which fits snugly on the front of the lens and will not fall off accidentally. And on the left side is the leather neck strap and the battery. And it's true, this does not come with a battery charger. That doesn't bother me because I still have the charger from the Q3, and I can also charge this with the USB cable. But I heard one guy on YouTube say that his Q3 43 did not even come with the battery, and he had to call B&H to complain. And the battery is the same as the Q3 and the SL3, so they can all be used interchangeably. In trying to turn on the camera, I can see that the battery is not charged at all. And switching to a fresh battery and turning it on, you can see that nice Leica animation. Setup is pretty quick and easy, and it prompts you right away to connect your camera to the Leica Photos app. You can do this by using the cable or wireless, and I did it wireless. As I've said, the camera body looks exactly the same as the Q3, and it can hold all the same accessories, including half cases and the thumb rest. And they designed the lens diameter to be the same, so it can hold all the same lens hoods. The build quality is the same as the Q3, and I've never had any problems with quality control on the Q3. But I did have an issue with the Q2, where the tiny ring around the thumb wheel just suddenly popped off, and I had to super glue it back on. The camera feels great in hand, but not quite as solid or premium feeling as the M11. The buttons and dials just feel slightly more plasticky compared to the M11. The flip-up screen is still very good and helpful. They've added this to the SL3, so I think they'll probably add it to the M12. And on the lens itself, the turning action of the aperture ring and the focus ring are still good. It still has a macro ring, and I wish they would make this stiffer or have a detent, because on my Q3, I often accidentally turn this, and I get that error message saying a macro ring not in correct position. And as you know, you cannot use the macro mode if you have a filter installed because of the new design of this lens hood. They made this new lens hood shorter, so when you turn the macro ring, the filter will bump up against the lens hood and you cannot enter macro mode. This is a major design error, so if you want to use macro mode, you cannot use the filter or you need a different lens hood. The door for the ports is made of a flimsy plastic material, And you cannot access this charging port if you have a half case on. But I hear now this will support plugging in an external Rode microphone. And here they are side by side. They look exactly the same, except for the difference in the front element because of the lens hoods. And with the lens hoods on, both of these lenses look to be exactly the same size. Even the length of the lenses look to be exactly the same. But here with the lens hoods off, the 43 lens is actually a longer lens. And they made up for this by redesigning the lens hood to make it shorter. But the sacrifice with this is that there's no room for a filter when in macro mode. Because going into macro mode, you need to extend the lens, and it does not fit with this new hood. But I do like the look of this new lens hood. It's kind of the same look as the 35 Apo-Summicron M lens. I haven't purchased any accessories yet for the Q3 43, so for now I'll be sharing the accessories with the Q3. And this is a black leather half case from Arte di Mano. It has a built-in hand grip and opens at the bottom to access the battery and the SD card. And this is the Leica brand thumbs up rest. This really helps to get an extra grip on the camera, but it is crazy expensive, so I don't think I'll be buying a second one. Finally, getting on to some sample images. My usual disclaimer is that I'm not a professional photographer and I'm just a beginner. These are the DNG files straight out of camera with no edits. I could punch up the colors later, but even with these raw files, the colors are pretty rich and vibrant. And the 43mm focal length is still wide enough to take in a scene on the street. This building was too far away, but I could have just cropped in camera down to 75. And it can also be good for portrait photography with less distortion and also some mild bokeh in the background. Next, I'll compare the 43 directly with the 28, shooting on fully automatic and from the same spot. The 28 gives a wider field of view, but in terms of color and contrast and sharpness, they both look very similar. Next, I'll focus just on the bokeh in the background, and I shot both of these on aperture priority, both wide open. Normally a 43 will give you better subject separation than a 28, and an f1.7 will do better than an f2. But these two things seem to balance each other out, and I think these two have about equal amount of bokeh. Now I'm testing the macro function. This is important because I need the macro function to shoot macro videos of my watches. So I wanted to see which camera would allow me to get closer in. The Q3 has a minimum focusing distance of 0.17 and the Q3 43 is 0.27. I was hoping the longer 43 focal length would compensate for this, but it looks like it did not fully compensate, and I was able to get slightly in closer on the original Q3. Next, I'll compare the field of view of these different focal lengths, also using my M lenses. You can disregard the differences in image quality because I had some difficulty importing the DNG files from the M11. But just concentrating on the field of view, I'm standing in the same spot and focusing in on that tree in the center. The 28 on the Q3 is very wide and takes in the most, and again, this is more like a 26mm lens. The biggest difference in tightness comes when jumping up to the 35mm. Then there's a smaller difference going to the 43mm, but it is still noticeable. And going up to 50mm, another small but noticeable difference. So it just depends on how wide or compressed you want your shots to look. For me, I think 28 is just slightly too wide, and I'm still deciding whether I like 35 or 50 better. But now this 43 throws in another variable into the mix, and I'm hoping it doesn't confuse me even more. I'll just run through these one more time. I'm going to need a lot more time to spend with this new camera to figure out which one I like better. The camera body is the same, except with a cool new color for the leather wrap. The 28 is just a little bit too wide for me, and most of the time I end up just cropping in camera down to 35. Sometimes 50, but I don't want to go down to 75 or 90 because of the loss in resolution. The Apo Summicron lens looks like an upgrade in terms of quality, but the question is whether 43 is the right focal length for me, whether it's too tight, and whether I'll miss the option of shooting in 35 or even occasionally 28. I do like the option of cropping down to 60 on the 43, but it's still a question of whether the Leica Q3 43 can fully replace the Leica Q3.